Joining the Kubernetes community meeting. Today is Thursday, June 29th. And as always, we record and publish this on YouTube, but for more excitement today, it's being live streamed. So if you are always hoping to be a YouTube star, like Chris is hoping to be a YouTube star, she's getting you live streamed today. So we're going to kick off our agenda, and this is Chris Nova, our moderator.
Hi everyone, how's it going? I am just getting settled in to the Redmond office right now, so I'm opening up the docs.
I can get us started with the demo then, if that helps.
Yes, please.
Awesome. So then we have a demo this morning from Mehdi. And
Sarah, do we need to start recording?
We are recording. We're all good. Thank you. We're going to start with Media, and he is going to be talking about Kitguard, an auditing system for Kubernetes. So Media, could you share your screen?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. My name is Media. Do you hear me well?
We can, thank you.
Good. Shall I start?
Yes, please.
All right. So I want to tell you, I work for Target, and I would like to tell you the reasons that we came up with Kitguard and the reason that we open sourced it. So Kitguard is a auditing system for Kubernetes that I and Ryan Belgrave have been designing and developing for the past few months. And the way we came up with this, one of the leads in our team, Milson, he said, we have hundreds of namespaces and hundreds of developers who are deploying to Kubernetes, but we wanted security, efficiency, availability, and stability, because not everybody was following the 12-factor recommendations, or they were not doing the best practices. And we didn't want to just manually go and delete things without any trace in there. We want an automated way of suppressing the violations in our Kubernetes clusters. And by the way, the name of the Kitguard is not Kitguard, it's Kitguard, like Kate, the guardian angel for Kubernetes. So that could be a little bit confusing. Sorry about that. So the kind of things that Kitguard can identify and take action on them are things like this. Violations like image size. If you have a super big image, if you have a downloading from an unapproved image repo, let's say you want to restrict your images to be only downloaded from your own companies or your own repo, not from anywhere else. Or if you want to restrict containers with privileged mode or extra capabilities for obvious reasons. Or if you want to enforce single replica not to be the case. Like if somebody's deploying the pods or the containers with a single replica, you could also identify that. Or if you have an invalid ingress, we had a few cases that people had a star in their ingress, and that would basically forward all the traffic from all the traffic from that cluster to that specific pod, which you never want to do that. Or if somebody mounts a Kubernetes cluster's host volume to their container, that's also a big no. Another violation could be like we have an annotation for who is the owner of a namespace. That annotation has an email or their chat IDs. If they don't have that annotation, we also can detect that. So you can also configure that. So all of these violations that I mentioned are all configurable. You could say, what is the image size approved one? What is the approved annotation? What is the approved ingress? All of these things are configurable, and all of these things are, you can ignore them, or you say, I only want this type of violations to be activated. So when we first started developing this, we start the most simple, the basic thing. We just want something to discover all the bad things. And then by the same time, we didn't want to take action on them in the same microservice, because we wanted to develop separately for it and also test separately. So we came up with two microservices, Discover and Action, one that discovers bad things and one that does action in them. But later, we also came up with a different microservice called Report that generates a human readable report out of all these violations and actions that happens in our clusters. This is the overall design of it. So we have three microservices: Discover, Action, and Report. And the report is like reads off of a database, Cassandra, and will generate a UI for you. The action will take action on all the violations. That could be scaling them down to 0 if they are a deployment. It could be suspending if they are a job or a cron job in Kubernetes, or it could be deleting if they are a pod. And after enough warnings through chat or mail, they will do the hard action on them. And you can configure that how many times they need to be warned before they do a hard action on them. An example of like, I can show you an example. This is an example of chat that I've masked all the names here because it's public. So this is our chat application, and we tag the people who did the violation and tell them this is your warning count number, that this is the source of violation, this is the type of violation, don't do it. And if this is the last warning, it's going to be red. It's because this is your last warning, we're deleting your things. And also we send them an email, we shame them an email. Anyway, so back to the design. The Discover part also have an API that you can consume it and make integration at the top of this. The API, I have a Minikube version of it. This is an API response. If you click on, let's say, deploy, it will give you all the bad deploys. This API is being provided so you can build at the top of Kitguard. And this is the report. In this report, this is human readable and human searchable. You can search for a specific violation and see what kind of violations were done by what namespace, and you can search through them in a nice UI. And also, we also collect metrics. I'm running out of time. I'm trying to squeeze as much information into this. So we collect two kinds of metrics: violation metrics and performance metrics. If you go to the API, the / metrics gives you tens of more than 30 metrics that you can collect. Like, for example, one example would be this: the percentage of bad deployments over time, or the percentage of bad images over time. Another metrics, these metrics are provided in the / metric endpoint that could be collected by something like Prometheus. And you can generate Grafana dashboards or any kind of dashboards, so you can do that. Another metrics that we collect is performance metrics. So while we make all these API calls to Kubernetes API to see if something is good or bad, or describe an image or describe a pod, we also collect how long it took for that API call to come back. So over time, you have a good idea how slow is your Kubernetes API over time. We open source Kitguard in Apache version 2. And we have a website for it that is, I think, is one of the most developer-friendly projects out there, because you can easily try it in Minikube in a few steps. Like if you follow the docs, you can build all the microservices and deploy everything, including Kafka, Cassandra, Memcache, everything in a Minikube. As I have it actually in my computer, I just built everything and deployed everything to Minikube in a few minutes, or less than a minute, I think. So I encourage you, if you want to give it a try, to go to kitguard.github.io and click on try it. It will guide you through how to build a project for either Minikube or Docker Compose. And also will give you all the documentations you need about what kind of violations Kitguard is capable of doing. I think I ran out of my 10 minutes.
Well, thank you. And I think we agreed if you want to keep going, if you have more to say, we have a few more minutes we could spare in the call. And if not, we can open up the floor to questions now.
Oh, sounds good. Yeah, I can show you more of my presentations. So these 3 microservices, if you go to GitHub, let's go just to GitHub now, github.com/Kitguard, you'll see all the repos, but don't let that scare you that there are so many repos, you don't know what to do. Just you start from Kitguard, start from here, and we have a make file that will guide you through doing all the commands you need for doing it. We encourage contributing back to Kitguard. It's our first release. Let me see what's the best thing to talk about now.
Does anybody have any questions?
We've got some compliments about it. It looks neat. And I suspect there will be people investigating it as well.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to checking it out. It looks really cool.
Thank you. And one thing that I would like to mention that currently we run this, the Kafka Discover has 2 modes, an API mode and also a cron job mode. So the API mode, as you saw, it returns an API for you in terms of a JSON response. But also we have a messaging mode, which runs currently as a cron job, let's say every 30 minutes, and goes through and discovers all the bad things and puts into a Kafka topic, and the action consumes it. So you might want to be interested to see how fast this can be. So if you want to consume the messages faster, you can scale out the action microservice to, let's say, 5, 10, or whatever you need. So they will try to do the actions faster. And then one thing that action does, it stores the state of the violations and how many times they have been warned and all the actions that have been done on them in a database in Cassandra. So they will not step on each other's foot by scaling them out. And one of the integrations that we are thinking to build at the top of Kitguard is called, we codenamed it Kafka Radar, which is going to be a real-time detection as opposed to a cron job that goes every 30 minutes or every minute that you want. It will be a real-time that as soon as it starts a violation, it immediately sends it to the same Kafka topic that action is consuming. So I just wanted to make sure to demonstrate that this is not real-time currently, but we can easily add a real-time integration at the top of it. Another thing that I would like to mention, the word guard here is not about like guarding in terms of malicious network activity. We don't detect any of those things. We focus on violations that directly talk about 12-factor or this list of violations that I've listed in the documentation. Another thing that we have designed it, like the violations are very extensible. So if you come up with your own violation, you can easily add it through the code. Currently it's not pluggable. Hopefully in the future it will be pluggable. We accept PRs, by the way. We're very easy in accepting PRs, and we'll be happy to review it and merge it back to the main repos.
We had a quick question. Is this used in production anywhere?
Yes, we are using it in Target Corporation. We are using it across all our environments in the data centers and cloud, public clouds that we are there.
Wonderful. This is really great. Any more questions from anyone else? We have some more compliments in chat. Looks like Jorge's impressed.
Thank you. And the technology that we are using Golang for the development, Kafka, Cassandra, Memcache, Prometheus. And another thing that I would like to mention, you do not have to have all of this if you want to deploy this. like you can basically go only discover. You don't have to have report or action. You can only have a discover API that shows you bad things. You don't need Kafka or Cassandra if you don't need action or if you don't need reports. You need all of this only if you need all of the microservices. If you want only, like, for example, no bad things, you can just deploy the Discover API, and it doesn't need anything like Cassandra or Kafka if you are scared of those things. But by the way, all of these things have an example in the Minikube that if you want to just deploy the Minikube version, you can have Cassandra, Kafka, and everything included in it.
What was the inspiration for using Kafka as a broker? Is it the publish subscribe model, or was it the actual queuing side of things?
Well, we wanted something that was available, and the way that we wanted to scale out the action service, Kafka was the best way, because we want the same message to be able to be consumed by different clients across. Like, let's say if somebody wants to build an integration that also consumes Kafka, the same message that we discover, they build their own integration. They can use that using Kafka because they accept different client IDs, as opposed to something like RabbitMQ.
Yeah, that's really slick. That's a great use of Kafka too.
Yes.
That's really awesome.
Thank you.
Okay. Let's go ahead and move on if nobody else has any more questions. Thank you again. That was a wonderful demo.
Thank you. And
it looks like up next in the agenda here is release updates. And I'm not seeing anything for 1.8. So I probably think we should jump into 1.7. And it looks like we have Don Chen, the release manager, with some updates.
Yes. So today's announcement, I prepared slides, but slides is boring this time. So we cut another release candidate this morning and hope this is the one. So we currently waiting for the final test results. And last night we cut one release candidate last night, and all the test results looks good. And then there's the one is missing because PI is missing accidentally, so we cut another one. So there, we are also like we have the Andrew our documentation lead here, and Andrew, maybe you can mention more about documentation.
Yeah, so all the docs PRs are in and merged for 1.7, so we're good to go. So once the release is out, then we'll merge that into the Kates.io site.
So we also have all the SIG group leads and contribute to the release notes. And right now, release team is kind of at the final stage is polish the release notes to make it like more user friendly. So we are pretty much everything's ready, just waiting for the last result signal, and then just say go kick off it.
Awesome. Yeah, it freezes. So people in the room were asking me if this is working. When I actually share my screen, it freezes our visuals into this. So I'm going to stop sharing our screen. Oh, look, you're all moving again. Hi. But that was 1.7 for you.
Okay. Moving on to 1.6.7 updates. Anthony Ye?
Yes. So we're coming up on about 2 weeks since 1.6.6. We do have a couple of issues that relate to Fluentd and GCP that they consider important enough that we will go ahead and make a cut within these 2 weeks. So I'm aiming to do it next week, right after the holidays.
Awesome. Thank you.
Do you need any input from anyone, or you're all set?
I'm going to send out an announcement today just to say, this is the draft of what's going to be in the release. If you have anything else that you want to have input, then let me know.
Sweet.
Okay. Moving on to the SIG updates. I will hand it back over to you, Don.
SIG
mode.
Sorry. On my phone, I didn't really prepare for this one, but I can update what we deliver in the Q2 and talk about briefly on the Q3. So in the SIG node and in the Q2, we enhanced our container runtime interface, and we introduced the container metrics to our interface. At the same time, the community made all the runtime vendor made more progress. So in the 1.7, we have the container integration through the CRI container runtime interface in alpha, and we also have the trial other container runtime trial in the 1.0 release, and we also have the flagging, which it is provide the hypervisor based of the runtime and container runtime, and that it is also in the 1.0 release. And also in this release, we have the enhance of our CPU support at node and in the Kubernetes and better integration with the Kubernetes. And we also fix several problems into our enhance of the user space of the eviction management for the node, which it is make the node is more robust when there's the resource starvation issues happen. And we also have the, just give me 1 second. We also have add more about like the node related of the security enhancement, and like for example, limited of the Kubernetes access to the secret and pods and other objects based on its nodes. So those kind of the security enhancement on the node side. So we also have a more better support on the init container and fix some a lot of issue in our system. And just 1 second, sorry. So we also have we also support of the single page namespace. That is another extra enhancement for the PerPod. And so we also in the node problem detector, and we add a lot of the support. We add of the kernel log support in this release. So we also have the make the node problem detector more extendable and pluggable. So in this release, we have the sample and how we are going to diagnose of the Docker related of the issues. We have those things. And on the advisor side, and we add enhancement of the support of Docker over the two storage driver, and we also clean up some like UDP metrics. So all those kind of things in the Q2, and in Q3 we are going to one thing I forgot in Q2 also node team hold a big role in the resource management, and we kind of define how we are the roadmap for the release management in next year. So we talk about how we are going to support of the high performance workload and how we are going to continue to enhance of the GPU. Or we talk about how we are going to enhance finish of the node spec on the resource management side. So those it is we've done in the Q2. And in Q3, part of those resource management work is going to be executed. So we have the work plan. And so for example, so we plan to add the core allocation on the node to boost some of the resource, boost of the high performance workload. We also in the Q3, we are going to add more of those node problem detector and also better integration with the remedy system, all those kind of things. And also we kick off the checkpoint discussion and design on the node side.
Okay. Thank you very much. Let's move on to SIG Docs with Devin Donnelly, please.
It won't be Devin. It will, in fact, be Andrew Chen, who is sitting here next to.
No, actually, it'll be me. Hi.
Oh, yeah, it will be Devin Donnelly, or the combo. We can tag team.
Yeah, we'll tag team it. Devin can go first.
Okay. So I'd like to talk a little bit about SIG Docs' past and future strategy, which is a place we've been discussing in the last couple of SIG Docs meeting. So SIG Docs in the past year has primarily concerned with getting the docs house in order. One thing to be clear about, the primary source of docs generation in Kubernetes is the actual engineering SIGs themselves. So networking, storage, node, etc. most of these SIGs actually write their own docs, and these docs are generated at release time. What SIG Docs has been doing for the past year is giving them attempting to give the other SIGs a place to put their documentation. Until we got some greater involvement in SIG Docs strategy, documentation was basically a big flat list under user guides, and the actual topics themselves were more or less free form without much in the way of structure or guidance or standardization. So the thing that SIG Docs has been primarily concerned about for the past year is introducing that standardization and creating a taxonomy of the different types of docs that we want for Kubernetes that are best for the project. And then migrating the existing flat list of unorganized topics into that structure. We're at a pretty good place with that now. Where SIG Docs needs to step up is to increase our involvement in the other SIGs in some way or another. Because right now, the interface between the other SIGs and SIG Docs is when some member of, say, SIG Networking or SIG Storage sends a pull request against the docs repo. And then all the negotiation and guidance about whether or not this doc fits in the overarching strategy happens at the pull request level. I would prefer SIG Docs to be involved earlier or vice versa. There are a couple ways we can go about this. Either one way is for SIG Docs to start assigning its members as liaisons to the other SIGs and working closely with the other SIGs to determine their documentation needs before its release time and it's 5 days until release, and SIG Networking, for example, is sending us PRs. This would require a large investment of resources into SIG Docs that we're currently not staffed for. The other way would be to do it in reverse, which would be to designate members of other SIGs to liaise with SIG Docs. But however we decide to do this, if indeed we decide that this is the best way to serve the project's documentation needs, I feel like we need to open this channel of communication. That's the most important thing. Whichever way it goes, either SIG Docs reaches out or other SIGs reach out to SIG Docs. Somebody needs to reach out in one direction or the other. Since SIG Docs is undergoing a bit of a shift now that the documentation itself is more stable. And I think we're in a place where we can start doing this as a SIG. Like SIG Docs is less concerned. Like now that the documentation has been reorganized into things like tasks and tutorials and concepts instead of user guides. We're definitely at a place where we can do this, and we're at a place where we can start accepting additional help from contributors. The thing is, though, that most contributors to SIG Docs can usually only give us a couple of hours a week. And for somebody from SIG Docs to be a liaison to another SIG is going to be a much larger job than that. So if we can get contributors to SIG Docs that are willing to give us some more time, that is a way we can use them. Does that make sense?
I think it makes sense. How would we go about going through the process of answering this question of what we want to do?
So what we need to do is, I think, this is just more or less unsolicited opinion here. We need to come up with a better, more aggressive timeline for when documentation-related information flows from engineering SIGs to SIG Docs. Because right now it flows at exactly one point as a large pull request. to the docs repo. We need to set some standards about if you're developing a feature for a release, here is when you need to have the user impact / user guide information ready. And here is when SIG, engineering SIG needs to start communicating with SIG Docs about their documentation needs. And those dates need to be slightly more aggressive or significantly more aggressive than what we currently allow for documentation PRs prior to a release. What we allow, we allow documentation PRs to even be submitted up to, I don't know, as little as a few days before a release. And if a PR comes in and it doesn't fit in the docs, we kind of just have to eat it and fix it later because we want to have the feature documented at all. Ideally, in a completely ideal world, I would see SIG Docs staffed with a whole bunch of technical writers from across the community that would actually be generating the documentation. But SIG Docs has 4 full-time technical writers at best, which is definitely not enough to cover a product with the massive surface area that Kubernetes has. So what few resources and full-time technical writers we do have are primarily concerned with organization and curation, and the actual content generation comes from the SIG engineers themselves. For professional quality documentation, I personally believe this isn't the best solution, but it's what we got.
I would propose as an alternative that this be a discussion that be followed up on extensively in the retrospective and potentially driven through SIG release as a bit of additional release criteria to help us fight against the perception that code is immutable after the code freeze, but docs can keep on changing long after, when perhaps if we put more stringent criteria earlier on in the release process for the existence of or quality of documentation, we might make some progress.
I don't even necessarily think we need to have draft documentation early, but what we have to have is some kind of almost like a user impact PRD for every feature, right? Just write up a little piece of documentation that says, this is how this feature is going to impact the user. This is what the user is this is how the user's experience is going to change based on this feature. And then we can determine what kind of actual documentation topics need to be written to cover it and work with the members of the SIGs to make sure those get generated in one way or another.
I think you wrote a bit of a proposal about this, Devin. Is this something you can share broadly with Kubernetes Dev? We can have a spirited comment debate and we can resolve to some sort of plan forward from that.
I would need to, I think that what we've shared back and forth is not necessarily quite ready for the wider community, but I would be happy to write it up and send it out. It would just take me a few more hours of work on it.
Yeah, awesome. And you've gotten some feedback that in the chat that it might be really good to go with the similar model to what SIG PM is asking for, which is a representative from each of the SIGs participating in their group, or at least participating on a regular basis.
I would think that's one way to get there.
Yeah,
is to have representation from the other SIGs at SIG Docs.
Yeah, I think what Ihor is suggesting is patterning and having one more standard way unless we have a reason to do it the other way. So, as I said, discussion. I don't suspect we're going to come to any sort of answer right in this conversation.
Yeah, there are some comments in the chat about requiring documentation and release notes before features get merged. That's really, really hard right now because usually features are sprinkled across many PRs. So we don't really have a good way of blocking them or reverting them at the whatever time we're deciding what should be in the release or not. We're going to be experimenting with feature branches as a possible solution to that problem, so that we can actually make go, no-go decisions, not just based on documentation, but also whether features are ready, whether they have adequate testing, and so on. up to 1.0, when the project was smaller, it was easier to rip things out and then force people to resubmit them later, but that's not really feasible anymore. So we need a different mechanism.
There's one more thing I wanted to address that's somewhat less grand, but I think at least somewhat important, if I have time.
Yes, quickly, please.
Okay. So it's been a long-standing thing for having support for previous versions of Kubernetes, or documentation for previous versions of Kubernetes apart from the latest version. And in Q3, we are migrating the production server from GitHub Pages, production web server for Kubernetes.io, from GitHub Pages to Netlify, which will let us host branches of documentation apart from master. This means we can host the branches for previous releases of Kubernetes, such as 1.6, 1.5, etc. I just want to be clear about the amount of support we will provide for those version branches. Basically, every time we launch, we'll back merge the current version of master into the say the previous like 1.6 or 1.7 branch, so that all the bug fixes get in. But at that point, it is a snapshot. We do not maintain previous versions of documentation or actively start making pull requests and bug fixes against, say, the 1.6 branch or the 1.7 branch if 1.8 is the current version. So once that release is finalized, that's what we got. SIG Docs probably doesn't have the resources to maintain 4 or 5 versions of documentation at the same time, considering how much we're stretched with one version. But it's better than what we have now, and I think it'll be pretty serviceable.
Okay, thank you very much.
Did
you have anything else you wanted to add on
yeah, so we're also changing the meeting times for the SIG Docs from 1 hour bi-weeklies to weekly 1.5 hour meetings. Next week, since it's a holiday, we're not meeting, but then the following week will be 1 hour, and then we'll start going to the half-hour format. And then related to, there seems to be interest in contributors in the community to help write the docs. So I've been talking to some people at Heptio. Heptio has generously contributed some time. So we're gonna, anyone who's interested in having sort of longer term projects to contribute to the docs, please contact me or Steve Perry or Zach, our new editor. That's it.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to the next SIG update, we have SIG Autoscaling with Solly Ross.
Hi, yeah, so I can talk briefly about what we've been doing, and then I'll talk briefly about what we're planning on doing for the next release. So what went into this current release were a bunch of improvements to Cluster Autoscaler, probably the biggest of which was improved support for heterogeneous deployments, in which Cluster Autoscaler, instead of randomly choosing a node type to scale up, will actually figure out what it needs based on the pods, and then kind of use an internal pricing model to figure out, all right, what's the minimum size that's needed to support what we need. We also landed an improvement for the horizontal pod autoscaler called status conditions. It mirrors the status conditions on things like pods and nodes, and replication controllers, I believe, have them as well, that kind of indicates the current state of the horizontal pod autoscaler in terms of things that could be potentially causing it to not behave like you would expect. So everything from, oh, hey, we can't scale because we're having a problem connecting to the metrics API, to, oh, hey, we would be scaling you up by 30 replicas, but you've put a cap of 10 in your horizontal pod autoscaler. So maybe check that out and increase your cap. So hopefully this will make it easier for people to see things that are blocking or currently affecting their horizontal pod autoscaler, which is something that we've struggled with in the past. Those are the two major improvements. Looking towards the future, we'd like to start to try to stabilize or move to beta rather horizontal pod autoscaler v2 with its support for status conditions and custom metrics. And also work is ongoing on the vertical pod autoscaling initial proof of concepts. The proposal is still undergoing discussion, but we've started to get some initial proof of concepts code merged or proposed in the Kubernetes/Autoscaler repository. So hopefully we'll get some more of that in the upcoming release.
Awesome. Thank you very much for the update. I think moving right along, we have 18 and change minutes left. So jumping into the announcements.
Hey, real quickly, I'm gonna share my screen if I can. First off, the first quick announcement is that SIG testing next week is on July 4th. I hear that's a holiday where people blow things up, so we won't be having our meeting then. Too busy blowing up our tests, right? Okay, so about 2 weeks ago, I sent out an email asking for some clarification on triage guidelines for issues that have the need SIG label, which corresponds to issues that have no SIG owning them. We're down to 1 from 1,100 about 2 weeks ago. So I just wanted to call out a huge congratulations to the community and to thank everybody who has put in the time to triage this out. The other graph I wanted to show real quickly, if I can, is this. It's from Sappho. This is slightly out of date. I'm not sure why it shows, for example, that there are 39 open issues that don't have a SIG. But this will give you an idea of roughly where the work is distributed. So perhaps surprisingly, perhaps not, SIG node followed by SIG API machinery followed by SIG CLI seem to have the lion's share of the issues. I'm sure this isn't actually representative of where these things belong, but this was the result of a lot of people taking their best guess. This begs a couple questions. Here, I'll stop sharing my screen now if I can. What do we do now? I wish I had a better answer to this. Speaking as a representative of SIG testing, my plan for our SIG is to apply priority labels to the 100 or so issues that we now own, and then decide whether or not we actually want to take some of these on as part of V18. I'm also going to use these issues as an opportunity to figure out whether or not it makes sense for SIG testing to own these, to help start drafting a charter for what it is that I think SIG testing should own and should not own. Speaking as somebody who helped triage some of these issues, there were a couple areas where I had questions or gaps. I believe George and a couple other of us during a contributor experience meeting said we were going to put out a bug triage document, and I plan on adding to that some of the learnings I encountered. So one of the really obvious ones I asked the mailing list, and we think we will have an answer for, right, is what do we do with issues that are GKE specific? Well, we think we ought to have a SIG GCP, and eventually that will exist, but in the meantime, we have a set of labels that belong to that. Some of the other hairier stuff was like, there are a lot of things that live in the controller manager that don't seem like they apply to any one specific SIG. Like some of them were like workload specific, and I think workload management maybe falls under SIG apps. But there were a couple other things like the node controller. Well, that's got the word node in it. Is that owned by SIG node, or is that about the life cycle of the cluster, or et cetera, et cetera? I think these are questions that we're going to require SIGs to help answer as they go through and sort of look at the issues that have been assigned to them, and things we could probably escalate to the steering committee if and when that moves forward.
Yeah, do you have a list of these things, Aaron?
So like I said, I can send out an email. We can start a thread on Kubernetes dev about this, or there was a doc where we were going to try and codify like what guidelines did we follow when we were triaging this, including what SIGs do we want to do, and then what priorities we want to do. And real quick, before you jump in, Another thing that came up yesterday, and I believe an email had been sent out to Kubernetes dev about this, is some users come to this community with a very component-centric view, not a very SIG-centric view. So it's clear to them that they have a problem with Coop Proxy. Now, in my head, I know Coop Proxy is, well, it's probably networking, so it's probably owned by SIG Network, although maybe it's SIG Node because it's the thing that runs on the node. But they're going to come at it from a component-centric view. So figuring out a way to align components with SIGs in an automated manner will help with this mapping going forward, and could allow SIGs that have ownership of a large number of components to further triage that out on the component level. Okay, I'm done.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, and so most of these we talked about at various times in the past. I have a reasonable idea of where I want almost everything to land. And some of it is based on historically where things have landed, but you know, I think most of them are at least obvious to someone. So having the list there will help us all comment on that. What I envisioned doing was a couple of things. One is we talked about putting SIG ownership into owners files in the tree. So that would be one mechanism by which, you know, the Kuop proxy in particular, we can make it clear what SIG owned that there. Also, you know, there was a question about, you know, what do we do with area labels? I had envisioned having some file that maps area labels to SIGs as well, to help automatically connect. If someone knew the area, they could specify the area, and then the mapping would automatically apply to SIG.
I also have a lot of idea to make this as a simple automated. I think that our task team and is build this like the SIG group centric test type, right? So you are going to the test grid, you can say here's the SIG node, what you care about, and so we can start from there. So like for example, like a Kuop proxy is a good example. Kuop proxy should have at least a set of the tests. Integration test, functionality test, all those kind of tests. And some of the tests, it is carried by the SIG node. It is true. Some of those tests, it is majority functionality owned by the SIG network, but there's a certain integration part. It is carried by the SIG node because that make node is not stable, so we care. So those kind of things, it is because monitored by the group, by the SIG groups, based on a set of the tests. So when the particular test is filed, we could trigger those kind of things and to apply the label. Like for example, integration test for Kuop proxy. So if that fail, and then we can say, oh, automatically detect from that test infrastructure, say that it is owned by the SIG node and the SIG network. So both teams need the kind of the exchange those ideas, what's the problem, what is broken. So that's kind of make the release of the engineer from the first hand. And so the on-call people can triage based on that kind of label. So then we like the SIG node on-call people then can say, oh, here's what's the new issue. By default, based those kind of things, the new test failure based on those kind of things, and what kind of the actual triage. So those kind of things and find the right owner. That's
for test failure specifically. There is a file now that maps all the tests to SIGs.
But that's we do this. It is we talk about in a 1.4 release, but that still is not. That's what I say. That it is not specific clear because like what I mentioned, like the Kuop proxy actually it is owned by two teams. It is most of actually it is like node team. It is tried first, and then Kuop proxy. But it is integration. But that's the problem. There's the not clear is Kuop proxy's problem. And actually, it is people think wants to know the problem. And so we did the most in the past. We did the most of the triage, and until we point the problem, then hand over to network. So we should solve this problem at the beginning of those integration problem. We need to clear. Of course, we need also develop more tests for those kind of things, make more cleaner, more clear. But what's that kind of things? We need at the first hand and have the two group people working together. Instead, like the block the progress.
One other great learning I had as a result of this is that of metrics or measurement. If I hadn't sent that email out that said how many issues were open with the need SIG label about 2 weeks ago, I wouldn't really remember what that number was. and there's no graph that I can show you that shows things going down over time. I really wish I could. I'm sure it would look pretty awesome because anecdotally, I saw that number dropping by like 100 a day. And I don't actually know everybody who helped triage it down because some people could use /sig things, other people could apply a label manually. And thus far, I haven't found a consistent big query that I can run against the GitHub archive data. So this is kind of a cry for, if anybody knows how to do really good, interesting analytics stuff like this. We were talking about the fact that there is a fix-it coming up within Google, and Contribex specifically was talking about what cool things could we do during that Contribex. And my opinion is one of the chopping wood and carrying water things we could do during that time that could also be fun is sort of figure out what are the goals that we want to accomplish and how could we measure that definition of success. Because I feel like this assignment of things to SIGs will help us for the better. I saw the open issue count drop from about 4,400 to about 4,200 in the time that we've done that. So I know like some of the really stale issues that have been open for a year have had some effect, but it would be great to really sort of define what we think success looks like, measure that, go do the policy change, and then see if we had the effect we wanted. Because it feels like a number of times in attempting to steer this project, we're kind of flying blind, where we think it's doing things for the better, but it's really tough to produce graphs that say, yes, it went the direction that we thought it would go. And so like the only thing I know how to do at the moment is go play around with BigQuery and the GitHub archive data of events that are generated on a day-by-day basis. But maybe there's more useful stuff out there. And we would certainly love to hear about it at SIG Contributor Experience.
Yeah, well, I'm hoping Sappho will be useful for building more dashboards and getting more visibility.
Do you have any news to share about that? I mean, at the moment, I, as a consumer of that, can sort of go log in and click on various panels. That breakdown of issues by SIG is really the only thing that I have personally found useful for like getting feedback. But the staleness of the data has made it difficult for me to rely upon that, and I am as of yet unaware of how to explore or add my own charts or graphs to that sort of thing.
Can you start a thread about that on SIG Contributor Experience?
Can I also say something?
I'd also I'd also suggest that there's a pretty good Power BI GitHub integration. So if you've ever looked at, so it's sort of drag and drop graphing and analytics stuff. That's another thing we could look into turning on.
Okay, I think starting the thread and following up there sounds like the best plan of attack. So we only have 6 minutes and change left. So I think, Sarah, you had a quick note you wanted to call out?
I do. Just one note, which is a thank you to George, who has been piloting an attempt to live stream this on YouTube today. And we had 15 viewers, 3 of whom were commenting while we were having this discussion. So we will publish this more widely and see what we can do about having this live streamed, as well as the Zoom connection, as well as having it available as a recording for all posterity and all your friends to watch and laugh at. Oh, yeah, so thank you, George, for doing that and taking it on as a project.
Does anybody have any other last minute announcements?
There's also a thank you to you, Chris, for hosting.
Oh, you're welcome. And then I have an announcement, and this is actually a call for ARMS too. I will be stepping down from the organizer position of SIG AWS, and that will be leaving us with 2 organizers. So if anybody knows anyone who is looking for a wonderful opportunity to step up and join the SIG and get involved and possibly help out, that would be great. Please point them my way or to the rest of the organizers, and we can get them onboarded and ramped up. Great. So no other announcements from anyone? Okay, I'm gonna call this meeting. I'm the organizer, so I can do that.
Happy Thursday.
Happy Thursday, everyone, and thank you for joining.
Happy Thursday, all.